All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour, where Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi has arrived in China and his focus is on shoring up the bilateral economic and strategic ties between the two nations. Remember, this visit has of course come against the backdrop of Iran being under scrutiny from the West over its crackdown on anti-government protests. The visit by the Iranian president has been made in response to a personal invitation by President Xi Jinping of China. And the three-day trip is Ebrahim Raisi's first state visit to the Asian economic giant, and the first by an Iranian president in almost 20 years. The agreements worth more than $10 billion American dollars in the fields of economy and infrastructure are expected to be signed during the visit. The two leaders will also reportedly hold talks, and delegations from both countries are due to sign cooperation documents. Reports also claim that Raisi will be meeting with the Chinese businessmen and Iranians living in China. Now, the president of Iran-China Chamber of Commerce has elaborated on what could be in store at the meeting.
As I know, during this visit, China will ink very good contracts with our country in the fields of economy and infrastructure. They are of great value, at billions of US dollars. I think the total value will exceed $10 billion US dollars. We are talking about things between $10 billion to $20 billion, related to different industrial sectors. Infrastructure development, construction of dams, power plants and railways, all these are possible now.
Both presidents met for the very first time last September at a summit for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Uzbekistan, where the Iranian president called for further expansion of bilateral ties. China is already Iran's largest trade partner. Both countries in 2021 signed a 25-year strategic cooperation pact. And it is said that this pact includes political, strategic and economic components. And along with Russia, China has also signaled its support for Iran's bid to join the powerful BRICS grouping of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. All right, to get us more updates in terms of what this, of course, visit by the Iranian president to China means, we're being joined in by our correspondent Richard Kimber, who's joining us live from Hong Kong and has been tracking this story pretty closely for us. Richard, this is a crucial visit by the Iranian president to China. Tell us what to expect from it.
Well, certainly this might be a more important visit for Iran than it is for China. China is certainly trying to improve its relations with many Middle Eastern countries. President Xi Jinping back in December visited Saudi Arabia himself, during which he managed to broker deals worth $50 billion US dollars. Now, whether Iran can ever match that kind of economic leverage seems unlikely, but it's certainly a hope from the Iranian presidential delegation that they can start to warm ties with China after their own political complications back in December, when China joined a group of Gulf nations in putting pressure on Iran over its regional politics and over its claim of islands in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is hoping that it can at least maintain economic ties with China, when of course Iran itself is becoming increasingly isolated globally, with US sanctions and pressure from its neighbours all mounting on the country amid, of course, domestic political unrest there as well. So Iran certainly looking to China to try and shore up its economic future and potentially giving it some kind of political reassurance that at least in the short term it has one large ally, even if most of the rest of its regional and international allies are not really on its side.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, considering the fact that in the backdrop of the Iranian nuclear deal and the negotiations that have been ongoing and the sanctions that have been imposed on Iran from the West, now these deals that Iran is striking with China, does it mean that the sanctions imposed by the West will not have the same effect that the West would expect?
Well, China is continuing to buy oil from Iran. According to most analytical reports from this part of the world, the amount of oil that it's buying is not really clear. There are various theories on just how much oil is coming China's way, but most analysts here say that China will certainly not be relying on Iran for its oil supply, and it's got far better options worth far It looks to the likes of Saudi Arabia instead. Many analysts here see this relationship between China and Iran not really as an economic one of any benefit to China, but more as a strategic political one, because certainly under the Trump administration, relations between the US and many countries in the Middle East really deteriorated. And China, many analysts here say, is looking for an opportunity really to broker more political influence in the region, just like it is in other parts of the world, for example, the continent of Africa, just to try and increase its global influence at a time when the US is waning in that regard. Another interesting thing about the timing of this trip that many people here are talking about is the fact that, of course, because of all of these balloon sagas that are ongoing between the United States and China, this comes at a time when the US-China relationship is really very fragile. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was supposed to be on this side of the world visiting President Xi Jinping last week. That did not happen. The fact that that hasn't happened, but this Iranian trip is happening, makes it even more significant as a show of strength potentially from China, that it wants to try and increase its global influence even at the expense of the United States. And so this visit from the Iranian president is being seen as perhaps a bit of a political coup on the part of Beijing to carry it off just days after Antony Blinken did not show up.
Absolutely indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Richard Kimber, for joining us and getting us those details then. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.